right, Prime Minister Narendra Modi in any moment from now would be meeting US President Donald Trump today and also hold bilateral talks on the sidelines of the ASEAN summit in Manila. And what we can tell you is that terrorism and trade is by and large on the agenda as far as these bilateral meetings are considered. We're going to put Prime Minister Modi's this bilateral with Donald Trump and overall the three-day visit at the ASEAN summit in larger perspective. This is going to be a top focus. And let me quickly go to all our guests who are joining us on this big story. Dr. Sreeram Chaulia, he is Republic TV's contributor, will be joining us in any moment. And also Saurabh Shukla, another Republic partner on political affairs and foreign affairs, to be joining us in any moment. Well, remember, all right. Well, we know that on Friday, Prime Minister, I'm going to go across to Dr. Sreeram Chaulia first. Sreeram, just to set the tone right, just on Friday when we heard Donald Trump, praising, lauding Prime Minister Modi's governance and describing India's growth trajectory as an astounding story. Well, that was something which set the tone as far as today's meeting on the sidelines is considered. What all is expected?
Sakal, definitely our economic trajectory increases the attraction to the outside world, especially to big powers like the United States. But Trump is quite used to lavishing praise on his interlocutors, irrespective of the strategic orientation. For example, he also heaped a lot of praise on President Xi Jinping and on China while he was there. And he went to the extent of saying that China and United States together can solve all the global problems. I think the task is cut out for Prime Minister Modi today to convince President Trump to stay on course, which is to develop a coalition in Asia to contain Chinese hegemony. Trump is wavering and he doesn't have a strong geostrategic and geopolitical instinct and global outlook. So I think Prime Minister Modi will be telling him about the quadrilateral, for example, which just happened, where officials of US, India, Japan and Australia came together in Manila on the sidelines of the ASEAN summit and vowed to pursue this free and open Indo-Pacific, which is essentially saying we want to keep it free of Chinese hegemony. So I think that is the number one issue in the region right now, and Prime Minister Modi is very much in accord with the traditional US line, which is that we must have a balanced Asia without Chinese hegemony. But Donald Trump is not a traditional leader, and therefore I think we have to hard sell the idea and convince him about this, because he thinks that he can get Chinese support to contain North Korea, which is of course not such a big threat to the whole of Asia as is being made out. So I think we have to be very clear as to have priorities. China is the number one problem that Asian countries like Japan and India are facing, and to some extent even Australia, and we expect the US to be on board with us, and I think that's the number one issue. The other point that Prime Minister is likely to raise is that we are in accord on Afghanistan. And I think there's a lot of traction we are getting with Donald Trump, because he is willing to see how India can be integrated further into his South Asia policy to counter Pakistan-based and Pakistan-sponsored terrorism and destabilization of Afghanistan. So both on China and on Afghanistan, we seem to be on the same page, but I think we will need to reinforce the message with somebody as unstable as Donald Trump.
Sreeram, coming to you now, there's also a lot of talk about Trump being lately using the term, and I quote, Indo-Pacific rather than Asia-Pacific when he talks about the region. Well, what more do you read into this stance that Washington tends to have this when Donald Trump calls Asia-Pacific Indo-Pacific, attaching strategic importance, more and more strategic importance to India's role in ASEAN, isn't it?
Very rightly said, Sakal. I think by its very etymology, the phrase means according a greater place for India in China's backyard. Because China prefers the traditional term Asia-Pacific, and it's refusing to accede to this new language, because that would mean conceding ground for India to play a larger role for its navy and for its commercial enterprises, for its companies, for its government to play a bigger role in what it considers to be its domain or sphere of influence. So the Chinese are going to resist this. In fact, President Xi Jinping toasted President Trump, saying we too are the key influencing powers in Asia-Pacific, and they're refusing to accept Indo-Pacific. But Indo-Pacific, we want to change the terminology, and the terminology is symbolic because it represents a different vision for Asia, which is not hegemonic, as I said, and which is not Chinese dominated, where we are saying there are other players. There's Indonesia, there are a number of ASEAN countries, there's Japan.
Okay, all right. All right. We're going to revisit this story. We're going to revisit this story by the time the meeting concludes between the two world leaders. Meanwhile, Dr. Sreeram Chaulia, Republic TV's contributor in international affairs, and our partner in political affairs and international relations, Saurabh Shukla, both of you, many thanks for joining us on that big story.